I think as young people in life, we often have this desire to leave behind a tangible effect on the world. You know, when you're growing up, you always hear, I want to change the world. And I think that's a beautiful part of being young. There's this inexperience and this desire that comes from the fact that often we haven't hit up against the same roadblocks that actually exist on the path to success. But not knowing those roadblocks is exactly what gives us the courage to dream that something different can happen and that maybe we can take the first step. Because often knowing how hard it is deters people from even trying. I think there's also a danger or a downside to this need and desire to impress a change upon the world outside of us that I basically in my life called the cup conundrum, right? So stick with me here. If you envision yourself as a cup and the knowledge and information and the experiences you have as an inflow, and every time you try and share that information or go out and act on it as an outflow, I think we have a working metaphor for what it kind of means to be young, and we have a good mindset to look at the conundrum of youth through. So there's three kind of situations that interest me with that. Situation one, that's when you never fill the cup. That basically comes when we refuse to push ourselves past our comfort zones and we don't go out and try and experience new things or change ourselves or challenge ourselves. When that happens, the same thing happens as with any standing water. Eventually the water stagnates and it becomes toxic. I think in our life that kind of reflects when we start becoming resentful. And over time we become resentful of our friends and our families and people we know who are going out and having those experiences and changing themselves and growing because we feel like we couldn't and we didn't have the opportunity to, and so with time we become angry and resentful and we feel like we're not going anywhere. Now, situation two is basically the overflow. Situation two is when you are constantly taking in new experiences and environments, but you're never opening the valve. You're either never passing it forward and sharing it with others, or putting your thoughts, at least for yourself, down. And I think what I've discovered in my life, what happens in that situation is that as the cup overflows, you have more ideas than you can act on, right? That's when I start feeling anxious and overwhelmed, and I don't really know how to move forward in my life. And funny enough, I kind of end up in the same spot as I did in situation one. I recede into myself and all that anxiety because I feel like I'm not achieving anything in life because I know too much and I'm acting too little. But it's really situation three that interests me the most, because situation three is when you open that valve but you don't fill the cup. And the reason situation three is so interesting to me is because it's the one I find myself in most often. See, what happens in situation three is that you're constantly giving and you're putting information out, or you're creating content, or you're sharing your ideas with other people, but you're not actually going and filling your own cup and having new experiences. And I think what happens in that scenario is, whether you want to or not, you kind of become a giver. And not just a giver, you become an expert, at least in the eyes of others, and worse, in the eyes of yourself. The problem with being an expert is, as a young person, I don't really want to be an expert. So I think in life, the way I look at it, I have different values that guide the different actions I take. And the way I've broken it down in my mind for my life is I basically have like 4 different values. I have my service values, my experiential values, my monetary values, and my self-care values. So service values, that drives anything I do actionably that is meant to contribute to my community, contribute to my society, right? Those are things like, to some extent, these YouTube videos. Those are things like volunteering, right? Like when I try and help out younger students with their resumes and stuff. Service. Then I have experiential values. Those guide the actions I take to gain experience, to get something out of the world, right? That might involve certain jobs I take. That might involve, going out and interacting with certain people, networking, stuff like that. Monetary is pretty self-explanatory, right? Things I do solely to gain financially. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all, but maybe that's another video. And then 4th is self-care. stuff I do to take care of myself. This is rest and recovery, ways to take care of my mental, my physical, working out, meditating, to some extent my relationships, right? All of those different things. Now, I heard someone recently speak about these ideas and the way that values basically guide what we do, and I thought that they said something really intelligent. There's an entrepreneur named David Meltzer, and he basically collapsed these 4 values into 2 categories: giving and receiving. And I think what happened when I started breaking down everything into one of these 2 categories, either giving or receiving, was I noticed that in my life, I'm really focused on my giving values. But the problem with the giving values, or the trap with the giving values, is that they can really easily become an ego trap. When you're constantly giving to others, with time, people start expecting of you to give. And worse yet, I think you start expecting yourself to give. And I think that sort of ego trap, where I know enough to be constantly giving back, is where I find myself caught a lot, when I feel that that sort of notoriety I've gained as a giver, or as someone who has information to provide, that notoriety can become a trap, because that's when I think people start becoming snake oil salesmen. Now, what I mean by that is, if you're not constantly experiencing new things and taking in and filling your cup, while also putting stuff out, one of 2 things happens. You either start talking about things that you don't really know of, or you start recycling the same thing and saying the same thing in 1,000 different ways. And I think we see this all over. You know, people who are posting bullshit motivational quotes over and over because they don't really have any substance to say, or people who are speaking about experiences and ideas that they've never actually experienced, or actions they've never taken. I think this idea of balance between saying things that you believe are true, that are congruent with your experiences, while also experiencing new things, is really important. Because you can't really be giving back to society unless you're learning. Now, the caveat to it is, I think as you give back, you also do start learning, and there's a little bit of filling of your cup. But in general, I think that trap is so dangerous because it gets our ego. You don't want to not have the answer when you've posited yourself as someone who always does. So when I started noticing that in my life, I had to really ask, what's the solution? And I think I figured it out. Be selfish. Sometimes. Basically what I mean by that is, people talk about the idea of balance all the time. And I've personally struggled a lot with the idea of balance. I'm the sort of person who, once I start working, I will either work till I can't work anymore, or I won't work at all. And when people talk about balance, in my mind, it was always this kind of binary that in a given day, you need to have balance. It's a day-to-day thing. But I don't think that's true. I think when people talk about balance, the way I've come to experience it is that your balance needs to occur over your lifetime. And what that means is that there are periods in your life, especially as a young person and a young professional trying to move forward in the world, that you're going to be going this 13, 14, 16-hour work days, where you're just focused on that. But that's balanced by the idea that there are other times in your life where you're focused and your priority is on something else. And I think that same idea of balance applies to their giving and our receiving values. As a young person, our values, in my opinion and in my experience, should be based on receiving. I want to pull and gain and learn as much as I possibly can from the world, with the knowledge that later on in my life, or in a different period in my life, my focus is going to be on my giving values. And what that shift mentally has allowed me to do is learn that I don't always have to have the answer. It let me check my ego. And that ego check was really important, because what it let me do was stop talking when I didn't have anything to say. And learning the ability to stop talking when you don't think you have something useful to say, for me, has been a really freeing idea. Because I think, finally, when it comes to our giving and our receiving values, or when it comes to learning things and sharing things, the beauty of being able to share ideas with other people and experiences is that we can be useful to them. And I think ultimately, that's the goal of life. To learn enough so that when our cup is full, we can pass that on and maybe do a little bit of good in the world. And that's a beautiful thing. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the video. I'm trying to build up the channel now. I kind of want to put out more content like this. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this sort of editing, this sort of content creation, and the way this video rolled. If you did, please hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to build the channel up. Leave a comment, hit a like, share the video, and I'll make sure I see you guys next time. So thanks so much. Take it easy, guys. Peace.